Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Well, it's very hard to compete with a rabbi from New York. Really. I can compete with somebody from Europe, Paris, Brussels, I don't know. But from New York, it's very, very difficult. But anyway, we Europeans always like to see those overseas coming to us. First, so that we may check whether we are okay or not, but also to see and check whether they are okay and how they are doing there. I can report to my fellow Europeans that what I have seen from the Americans who came to us these 2 days, we are halfway okay. And this other half we will leave to them. So we are 100%. Without them, without us being 50-50, there is no the whole. So when we are in Europe, okay, 50, and they are 50, then we are the whole. Now, as my friend Rabbi Schneier, who is the son of a great Rabbi Schneier, whom I know from 80s, and most, especially I know him after the signing of the Dayton Agreement, or the peace agreement in Bosnia-Herzegovina, because in Balkan we have the history of post-peace period or post-war periods. So you have to choose which one you like. If you speak about post-war period, then you remember the war. But if you speak about post-peace period, then you speak about the peace. And his father invited us from Bosnia-Herzegovina, Cardinal Pulic, Metropolitan Nikolai, and Mr. Finci, who is the president of the Jewish community in Sarajevo, and myself. We are a small group, seeing each other but not talking to each other. We are at odds with each other. But Rabbi Schneier brought us to New York, and we forgot where did we come from, because Rabbi Schneier talked to us about his synagogue, his efforts about peace making with many groups, and then he brought us to Washington, and of course we visited the Jewish Museum in Washington. This was the first time that I saw, not in the books but in the museum, what is Holocaust all about. And this is what made me cry. Probably not what I felt at that moment, more of the pictures that I have seen in Sarajevo for 4 years that reminded me of the pictures that I saw in the Jewish Museum, Memorial Museum in Washington. Now, why I'm saying this, and why Jewish community is important in Sarajevo. It is a small community, and it has historical importance because in 1492, when the Jews and Muslims were expelled from Spain, because they were lighting these lights on Hanukkah secretly. And this is why Inquisition was initiated in Spain. Not because somebody did wrong, but those Jews who converted to Catholicism or to Christianity, they were charged that they are not up to their promise to be converted, because they were doing this Hanukkah in their houses secretly. And this is why Inquisition was initiated. And then these people who were expelled from Spain were received by my grandfathers in Sarajevo. So I just want to tell you that I am proud of my grandfathers who did have the sense to receive your grandfathers in Sarajevo with your Haggadah that is well in the Museum of Sarajevo. So for those of your grandfathers and my grandfathers, I want you to give them a good hand for our grandchildren in the future. Now, what is the importance of the Jewish community today? It is a small community, and I always like to read these old books of so-called mirrors of princes. What it is, in the old times, the politicians, the kings, the princes, they didn't have television, they didn't have WikiLeaks, they didn't have this New York Times, Washington Post, they didn't have all these journalists going around, but they did have their writers who lived at the palace. So they were writing the books so that they can see themselves on the mirror how they look like. One of the famous books of this genre is the Siyaset Nama of Firdausi, very famous Persian writer. And then there was a Turkish writer called Yusuf Haji Khas, who lived in Xinjiang. It is in northwest part of China. I just visited this area, these Uyghur people who live there. He wrote, this Jewish writer, this Turkish writer wrote a book similar to this Firdausi to compete with the Persian poetry or literature at that time. He wanted to prove that the Turkish language is as rich as Persian, like you have today competition between French and English and German, I think. Everyone wants to prove that they can express things, all right? Now, I visited this grave, but I was not aware when I was visiting until I came back home, and then I found this book that he wrote, A Mirror of Princes, in my library, translated by my Jewish professor at the University of Chicago, Robert Dankov, who taught me Turkish language. Now, you Europeans who know the one reasons of the conflict in ex-Yugoslavia, it is because I belong to a old Ottoman cultural circle, if you like. And my fellow neighbors, Serbs, they always charge or make us guilty because we are of the Ottoman origin. And they call us Turks. And if you remember that Mladic, when he finished genocide in Srebrenica, he said, this is our revenge against the Turks. He didn't say against Bosniaks, Muslims. And can you imagine me being killed in Bosnia because they say that I am Turk, going to University of Chicago, learning Turkish language from a Jewish professor? Can you imagine this? No, you cannot. But I can tell you, this is reality. Now, my professor, Robert Damon, translated this book of this Yusuf Haji Khas that lived in Xinjiang, in China. And then I found a wisdom that I want to share with you. In this book, this writer was advising the king, saying to him, you should not neglect 4 small things. Small fire, small disease, small enemy, and small wisdom. So, if I want to give you now advice, please don't neglect what I am going to say you, because I am coming with a small wisdom from a small Bosnia. And not to be too much arrogant, I would like to tell you that a small community, Jewish community in Sarajevo, was a small wisdom that put us together, and we were able to establish inter-religious council. If it not for the Jewish small community in Sarajevo, we wouldn't have this inter-religious council. So if you are small, don't neglect yourself. You can be a very important in a moral sense. The same goes with the Mufti in Rwanda. A small Muslim community was very instrumental to put together Christians and to create inter-religious council in Rwanda. This Mufti, Grand Mufti in Rwanda is still alive. Now, let me then come what I say. I wrote my presentation. They said to me that I have 10 minutes to speak, but I have to tell you. You see, when my wife is present, I can keep my promise, 10 minutes. But if she is not with me, then it's very difficult. So when I said in London that I will not keep my promise because my wife is not here, so when it was over 10 minutes, somebody came to me with a note saying, your wife is calling you by phone. But my phone, I turned it off, so it's not working. Now let me just say, I will not read to you all this. I left my written statement to the organizer, and if they find it good, I will appreciate. But then I would like to share with you three things. First, in Sufi literature, there is something that I like very much and to share with you. And Sufi literature is more imaginative than the law literature or fiqh literature. And Sufis would tell us that there are three basic needs of human beings, which are at the same time pleasures and passions. The first need is the physical need, al-ladhatul jasadiyya. The second need or pleasure is the al-ladha al-fikriyya, intellectual need or intellectual pleasure. And the third is spiritual pleasure or al-ladha al-ruhiyya. If I would describe now our civilization, I would say that this civilization is obsessed by these three needs and three pleasures and three passions, or should I say two pleasures and two passions, the physical passion and the intellectual passion. Today, we have technology that can produce our food need more than any time in the history of mankind. But at the same time, we have now more hungry people than ever before in the history of mankind. We have people who are dying because they are overeating, and we have people who are dying because they have nothing to eat. This is the paradox of our civilization. Now, at the same time, we invest so much into the intellectual pleasure that as never before we have all this access to all the information we like. Intellectual satisfaction is higher than any time in the history of mankind. What about the spiritual need? What about the spiritual pleasure and spiritual passion? I think we are in the 21st century either to meet our spiritual need, our spiritual pleasure, and our spiritual passion, or we will lose and we will not be able to enjoy any more physical pleasure and intellectual pleasure. And this is why I think that the 21st century is the century of spiritual revolution. In what sense? What is spiritual pleasure? Spiritual pleasure is love, courage, compassion, brotherhood, equality, generosity. We lost these things. And because we lost these things, because we lost this spiritual pleasure, we had And we have to acknowledge that 20th century was the bloodiest century in the history of mankind. Despite the fact that we, after the Second World War, established UN to be the guardian of peace in the world, what we have today, we had more wars by number after the establishment of UN than ever before. So these paradoxes can be solved only if we try to instigate and to motivate our intellectual, our spiritual pleasures. This is one. Keep in mind this, then I would like to connect my 2 points, last points, to the first one. If we look today about the issue of peace and war, we will find the following things. I have never come across a book called The Art of Peace. But you know very well that every first lesson in any military school is about the art of war. The book that was written 600 years ago before Jesus was born. The second fact that we all know is that we religious people, Christians, Muslims and Jews, and also humanists if you like, they all talk about just war. I don't know an author who wrote about the just peace. And the third is that all of us, from the religious point of view, have the idea of the holy war. But I don't know how many of us think about the holy peace. So I am now writing and inviting you to help me to introduce a new concept of not the art of war, but the art of peace. Not the just war. There cannot be just war. But it can be just peace. And let us, instead promoting the holy war in our mosques, synagogues, or the churches, promote the holy peace. Where? In the Holy Land. And where is the Holy Land? The Holy Land is where you live. This is your Holy Land. And this Holy Land, when you live, is God's gift that you should live in peace and security in this holy land of yours, or holy house. And the third point connected to all of this, I believe that 20th century should be the century of humanism. We should come back as a spiritual revolution to the basics of humanity. A revolution doesn't mean to change the course of history irreversibly. Revolution means to come back to the initial position of yours. And the revolution comes when people realize that there must be alternative to their way of life. We today, ask anyone on the street how he feels today. There is no human being who is following what is happening in the climate change, who is following what is happening in the nuclear armament competition, and who is following what is happening in the world of those people who are hungry and who are deprived of basics of their life. There are no intelligent men who would not say that this is not the way we should go. We should change this. And when people come to the point that they see that there must be alternative to their way of life, you are at the beginning of a revolution. And this time, not bourgeois revolution, not industrial revolution, not an information revolution, not intellectual revolution, it must be spiritual revolution. Spiritual revolution that will get us to the idea of that we have to believe in right, not might, that we have to believe in science, not mythology, and that we have to believe in the legitimacy of state, and not only the theory of state, but legitimacy of democracy. So with this, I think, instead of religious fundamentalism, I think we are at the beginning of a human fundamentalism, or fundamental humanism, in the sense of that we should take care of each other. Especially, I appeal to the Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Why we have the problem? If we have any sense of morality, if we have any sense of responsibility before God, we cannot explain why 60 and more years the Holy Land is the Holy Blood. We cannot explain to anyone outside. I believe that there is a way to peace. I believe that there is a way of settling the things in the Holy Land. We, the children of Abraham, will be responsible before God if we believe in one God about our situation. You know why? Not because we are different, but because we are similar. Our problem, the Jewish-Muslim problem, is not in our differences. It is in our similarities. And the similar have more difficulty to live with each other than those who are different. So we have to learn how to live with our similarities. And our similarities from Adam and Eve, from cosmogony to cosmology and to eschatology. We all believe in the Word of God, and we all would believe in the law of God, and we all believe in Adam and Noah and Abraham and Moses and Jesus and Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon all of them. It would be too simplistic to say that what we see of floods, that it is like biblical or Quranic floods that we read. But it would be too arrogant on our side not to start building the Noah's Ark, in which everyone can find the place. So, I thought to start with, but I will end. Happy Hanukkah to all of you, rabbis. And I must tell you, I had so many speeches in my life. And I have so many introductions. But the way Rabbi Schneier introduced me, I wish that my wife was here to hear, because she doesn't believe that I am so good. But I will try to tell her. So when you meet her, tell her what you told me now here. And also I would like to say Happy New Year to my brother and sister, Muslim sisters. 1432. It is already New Year, because we count the day not by the middle of the night but by the sunset. So it is already the 1st of Muharram of 1432. And you know, I said we are similar. The same as Jews and as Muslims, we still look at the moon. Of course, we in Bosnia we calculate, we don't look anymore. But there are some people who are still looking at the moon, and they determine when the months. But because the year is shorter, our New Year is not fixed. It is always 10 days earlier every year. So I said to my friend Rabbi Schneier, when you had your prayer, I counted. You were only 9. One was missing. And then he said to me, you were the 10th. So we had our prayer completed. Thank you very much for your listening.